ensure proper implementation of affirmative action in India, especially in the Indian Institutes of Management, their PhD course, and in terms of faculty reservation. He has filed a case against IIM Ahmedabad for non-implementation of reservation norms in the Ahmedabad High Court on behalf of Ambedkarites. S. Karthikeyan, our next speaker, is a convener of the Ambedkar King's Study Circle based in California. The AKSC is a membership-based organization. The organization spearheaded the Cisco case against caste discrimination and supported employees and the Department of Fair Employment and Housing by mobilizing anti-caste peoples. Jaspreet Mehel works as an accessibility specialist with academic services at Brandeis University and provides access to classroom and exam accommodations to students with various physical and learning disabilities. Prior to this, Jaspreet has worked in the nonprofit sector on maternal and child health care for marginalized communities for more than 5 years in India. She is a proud member of BSG and partakes in various activities to advance Ambedkarite ideology and the anti-caste movement. Finally, Milind Awasarmol is currently working as a director of Etrade in a financial corporation in New York. As a staunch Ambedkarite, he is committed to the struggle against caste discrimination and spreading Babasaheb's teachings internationally. He is on the board of directors of Ambedkar International Mission and has been a facilitator for many atrocities-related protests in the tri-state area. He is very passionate about taking this cause to the UN, and he has been instrumental in many initiatives for engaging with the UN. So thank you all for coming today. To start us off, I would like to ask you what the experience of discrimination in the tech industry has been like for some of you. Did it surprise you to be facing this kind of discrimination in the United States? And anyone can start us off with that.
Okay, if no, I can take it on. All right, hello everyone. So I'll just share my experience of discrimination in technology, which really goes back to my college days in India. I graduated from Indian Institute of Technology. So the last word in that is technology. And that's where I was admitted based on reservation. And I faced a really tough time because of the reservation category. That's how I was admitted in that institute. There was a presumption, right, from the fact that it was an identity that was associated with me, that I was my rank was in the scheduled caste category, and there was no an uncompromisable view of reservation that there is no merit in anybody who avails reservation. And then what happened after that is, when we graduated, I was picked up for Infosys, which was at that time one of the leading IT software companies. And out of my pretty much my entire batch who attended for Infosys application, only 4 of us got picked. So that defeated the whole merit argument right then and there. And then when I joined Infosys, which is a big company even today, there was no discrimination as such, for the simple fact that caste did not come into play. The assumption again was that no reservation category folks would be entering into the private sector because there is no reservation there. And from there I came to the US. And in the US, obviously this was in the early to mid 90s, where we could see the Indians at that time, particularly from the technology sector, were not so rooted into the US. They were mostly on H1 or on a B1 visa. So the caste kind of remarks would be in a very isolated way within small private groups, and that also making sure that it does not go beyond that small group, because people are on H1 and they didn't want any to attract any complications. But the remarks would come in the form of, if you see parking spot for the disabled, they would be like, oh, you know, there is like the assist reservation here in the US also. Or there would be comments like, oh, the African Americans very much parallel the Dalits in India because they so much thrive on state welfare policies. So these kind of things, those were very limited within a private group, and those were, I won't say benign really, but they were not that consequential. But This was 26 years back. Now, I have seen this journey as the influx of Indians increased in the US because of the IT sector and because of Y2K and henceforth. What has happened since then is that this voice, which I earlier said was within a hushed tone and within a small private group, has now reached into the corporate world. In corporate America, we have various egalitarian policies where inclusivity, diversity, and harmonious culture for various different ethnicities, and so many things sensitivities are handled at the corporate level. We are sensitized. We have to take our annual training in these things. So in these meetings at a higher level, now there is a voice that is consistently coming out of the Indian diaspora, where the reservation itself is being presented as a discriminatory act against the caste or against that section of society which don't avail it, or rather, in other words, they are being presented as the victims, and those that are availing reservations are being presented as the oppressors. And Americans or the corporate world here, they being a neutral party and not having the right insight into this, are being misled. And I would say, so this is very ominous that if this trend continues, there will be a mindset and there will be opinion against this particular identity. And I think that's something that we need to really guard against. And yeah, that's my experience I would like to share.
Anyone else who would like to respond can go ahead.
Okay, so we start facing the discrimination after availing the affirmative action, as Milind said. I studied at IIM Ahmedabad, IIM Calcutta, I'm sorry, Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. And then the person who interviewed was, of course, the professor. And he taught us a course, RDBMS, Relational Database Management Systems, in my second year there. We did a project together with one of my wingmate, and we went and presented. He very clearly liked the project. The project was conceived by me when I went to IIM Calcutta. I had 8 years of IT experience by then, so I knew what needs to be done, how the whole thing should be structured, etc. But that idea was implemented in the project. And this professor, since he knew that I am from the reserved category, as we call it, as a beneficiary of the affirmative action, he had the audacity to ask me how much was my contribution on the project. He had clearly liked the idea that the project was good, but he had that audacity. And then I was kind of taken aback. I knew where the question is coming from because I knew he was there in my interview, he was there in my group discussion, evaluation, and so on. So he knew my caste of the reserved category. I, of course, vehemently told him that no, I had contributed, if not 50%, if not more than 50%, certainly 50%. My other colleague also vehemently said that no, Anil has worked equally hard on this project. This is a joint project. It's not that I have done it. This is just an instance that I'm talking about. Of course, every sessional marks or the practical marks, you will be given a bare minimum marks, that because below which you will fail, and they of course wouldn't want you to fail because then it will come for a bigger investigation and it will be a big mess. I had protested on such instances there, got into trouble as well. Went up to the proctorial board when I protested vehemently against one of the professors during my engineering college. The course was artificial intelligence back then. It went up to a proctorial board saying that no, the marks given are wrong. My test scores were higher despite all of that. So this is a very, very common phenomenon, that the biases that they have, they all show up. In fact, the way I would frame the reservation is a new form of casteism, because they know the people who come through reservation belong to certain caste background, and therefore they kind of detest it. They hate it is the right word. The discrimination is much lower in the order of things. Thanks.
Would anyone else like to take up this question? Okay, well.
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, we can go to next.
Okay, thank you for those responses. So moving on to our next question. Is the tech industry specifically more plagued with this discrimination than other industries? And why do you think this may be so?
Karthik, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the SAYI and the BSG for organizing this important panel on this subject. That when we saw the title first, the title, the tech discrimination, it is interesting and open for multiple interpretation, especially in the period of Cisco caste discrimination in the courts. And Amazon finally accepted that workers have to pee in the bottles who are working in the Amazon warehouse, which refused for a long time, but a couple of days back it accepted. And also the Amazon's workers retail, those who applied for the unionization, their effort is defeated with a margin of just 16 votes. But 1,738 people voted, but the 60 more people voted against it. And including what we call is there is a approved campaign frauds and alleged voter fraud also, which is being investigated. The 500 people challenged how they were counted or discounted. I'm very happy to be part of the discussion with the friends across the coast from importantly the different organizations and the working background. With that whether the caste or the racial discrimination is more in tech than other industries. Before getting into the details of it, that in any industry, what is being practiced or observed as a norms, it's an extension of what is happening in the society at large. At the society at large, the racial discrimination or the caste coding, caste practices, it is all accepted. So we cannot expect somebody who is brought up and living the society and goes to the office and give up and everything and become a neutral person. First of all, that is a perception that all we have to understand. It is not like when you are dealing with something on tech industry or any other industry, we should not forget the social reality. For example, take a manager who or a worker who is practicing caste in many forms. One of the forms and the declaration, self-declaration of caste. What we are seeing in Silicon Valley, also people from the privileged caste or what we call the so-called upper caste people openly proclaiming their caste. According to the testimonies that is collected by Ambedkar King Study Circle, during lunch hours, whatever the conversation starts, eventually they reveal the caste, the so-called upper caste people. And this is the tendency. So how can and there are some temples in America, I think one from the West Coast, one from the East Coast, and one from Texas, is openly giving an advertisement. There is a Brahminic ritual called Upanayana. The temple openly says that is open only for the Brahmin, Kshatriya, and Vaishya boys. So if these parents are working in some tech companies, then what would be their attitude? And now let me get into the details of how it is predominant in tech industry, where other industry, the implications that we cannot experience soon. One example is in 2015, there was a person in Apple working for a Siri project, and which has to recognize the speeches of various languages, of course in English, but in different what do you say, the
Accent.
phonetics, like Indian, American, Indian, Singapore, Australia, and all. And the developer who was doing it, the manager who was doing it, is asked whether we have to incorporate the voice recognition for the African American style. Then the Apple manager told you need not incorporate because this app is aimed for some privileged section of the society. So how it will penetrate now? A manager in a Siri project, which is one of the very important and most used application in Apple, has this tendency, and how this one will be passed to the bottom of this layer, the manager, the director, senior manager, workers, and easily they can pass any anti-caste or casteist or racial comments, and it will be normalized. So that is what our position also. All the discrimination and practices are pretty much normalized in tech industry, which is more dangerous, uh, which is very much expounded and explained how it is deep rooted in American society by Ruha Benjamin in her book Race After Technology. So that is where the issue is not a merely a technological in tech industry, and it is actually a philosophical one. Mainly, I would like to emphasize that things are normalized in society and which is reflected in tech industry. Later part of the questions that I can cover how it is directly linked to the Cisco case.
Once any one speaker finishes what they have to say, please go ahead and continue, whoever else would like to take up the question.
Yeah, hi, Jai Bhim, everyone. I would just like to, add some other aspects to Karthik's comment. I totally agree. I think it's not about particular industry. I think it's about the society at large. So before I kind of talk a little bit more about where I'm coming from, I do want to, talk about my own positionality. I grew up as a person with a lot of caste privilege. And so I am right now at a stage where I'm trying to, work towards annihilation of caste through Dr. Ambedkar's ideology. So, I wanted to put that up front. And then, as Revati introduced, I do not work in tech sector. So I'm not going to take the second part of the question, but I do want to comment on the first part where, working in the university, I work with Brandeis University. And as some of you might know, Brandeis came up with including caste in the non-discrimination policy in 2019, December. And this was part of an initiative where the idea was that caste should be a protected category, although it's not a protected category. It should be a protected category in the university, although it's not a protected category, in the larger law framework. So, that was the idea for us to move forward. And it was kind of surprising, but also not surprising that most of the incidents, and I as an alum was trying to gather experiences from students, from alum, to see that whether we can provide enough justice to the board members of the university to make sure that that caste comes in the non-discrimination policy. And, it was very, very interesting, but also heartening to see that schools which had more folks from South Asia had more incidents reported of such discrimination, which kind of speaks directly to this fact that, you don't leave your caste behind or caste privilege behind when you are either in the US or in either in the US in tech industry or any other sector per se. So, that exists whether you are working in a university, whether you're working in any field. And so, getting that, and then this was one part of discrimination, but also privilege. This is something I can speak from my own experience, that in classrooms, getting up and having the audacity to say that, oh, I'm a Rajput, and that is why this is my cultural, understanding of the facts. And, somebody in the chat posted that, there are organizations based on caste. And so one would ask that what is the issue with mentioning that you are from a particular caste? But the issue here is that when you are mentioning your caste and you are from a privileged community, you are constantly perpetrating the fact that you are higher or above somebody else. And that is the problem. That is the root cause of the whole, this system, what Babasaheb calls as a glass house, that you can't move up or down because you're born into that particular community. And that's what we are trying to annihilate. So annihilation of caste should be the basis, but we have to recognize that it exists before we can move to annihilation.
So in the US context, if we want to talk about casteism or a Brahminism, as we call it, it can best be described as a white supremacy. I think in US, the white supremacy term is very well understood. Firstly, the Brahmins or the Rajputs or the Vaishya, Kshatriya, they have the advantages which they do not acknowledge. And this will exactly kind of reverberate with the white supremacy. They have the advantages, but they do not acknowledge those advantages. Then they do not want to acknowledge the disadvantage the other groups have. Again, it goes with the white supremacy. They only talk about merit. So the Brahminism, the Brahmin people, the upper caste people only talk about merit and do not acknowledge that the definition of merit itself is decided by them as it suits them. If we were to talk about the definitions of merit couple of hundred years ago, if you know Sanskrit, then you are a kind of meritorious Pandit or whatever, right? Whereas the access to Sanskrit, the other backward caste, let alone the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, they didn't even have access to study Sanskrit. So one section, you have deprived them of studying itself. And then you bring the concept of merit, that if you know Sanskrit, you are meritorious. And in some form or a shape, it continues even today. So when in India, they talk about those joint entrance examinations or NEET examinations, these are the examinations there are plethora of classes which are conducted. You have to pay a lot of fees, and only rich and upper caste and the urban area people can kind of have access to that. Rural people, the scheduled caste people, the poor people do not have access to those classes, and then they struggle to qualify for some of these exams. So that's how the definition of merit is decided by the Brahminical people. And then they all talk, oh, it should be all merit, there should not be any affirmative action. They vehemently oppose any affirmative action. So much so that affirmative action is the new casteism, as I said earlier. And there is absolutely no talk about reparations back in India, at least. So if you were to kind of understand, some of you who are from, say, a non-Indian background, how do we define casteism? It can best be described as a white supremacy.
Anil, I completely agree with you. That's a very telling way of explaining how casteism plays out in general with the white supremacy. I'll add just one point to it. On top of the white supremacy, there is also this ideological justification for it. So there is this fear of God. One is compelled to do that by virtue of an ideological basis, and that makes it even worse. That is very, it becomes very strongly entrenched into the psyche of people. And Anil also mentioned that today we have reservation as a manifestation of caste-based discrimination. So there is this tendency for the forward caste to come out and say that we don't believe in caste. We absolutely are non-discriminatory, but we do hate the idea of reservation. That's something which we don't support. Actually, reservation, the reason it is being hated is not for any other reason, but just that reservation is that empowerment tool which juxtaposes Dalit, the lowest caste, with the highest privileged category. And that is a constitutional provision. And so nothing much can be done about it. And so this putting on the same plane of one section of society which is privileged and which is given it on a platter, and another society which was always denied it and ideologically was not supposed to have it, reservation brings them on that common plane, and that is where the problem starts. So though the victim or though they might be blaming reservation, but underlying it is about the caste privilege or the upward mobility of the lower caste, which is what they have a problem with. And that, I think, is something we need to understand, because if you do take away the reservation, let's suppose, and somebody by pure merit does come to competition or come at the same level with other higher caste folks, will they be treated with equality? Will they be treated with respect? No. The hostility, the animosity, the resentment will all be there, and that has manifested on many occasions with people of high power of seat. So high seat of power. So that is a well-known fact. So this is all an ideological conviction which plays out in these various forms. And somewhere, like Karthikeyan said, that if it exists in the society, it's going to manifest or rear its ugly head in every walk of life. And in the corporate world also, it is going to come out. Just one comment on the technological, whether casteism is more in technology. Yes, and I think folks before me answered on that. Just one point I want to add there. The number of folks from South Asia, particularly from India, that have come into the technology sector has been overwhelmingly lopsided over other areas. So I think that could be one of the reasons why we see technology as a vulnerable domain where casteism rears its head out there. Thank you.
Thank you. I think all of those responses are very revealing of how complex this issue is. That was a great analogy in terms of white supremacy. And it's definitely disheartening to hear that, you know, not only people who have immigrated here, but even students in universities like Brandeis are sort of showing the same kind of bias. So moving on to the next question. I think I'm curious as to what motivated all of you to engage with Dalit activism. Some of you have specifically been involved with the recent Cisco case. What was it like to deal with the US justice system? You know, because this is a cause that's being fought in a country where casteism didn't initiate from. So what was that whole experience like?
So dealing with the US justice system, not so much about the justice system, but the way Department of Fair Housing and Employment, DFEH, has taken the case seriously as a workplace discrimination is very commendable. We hope the case doesn't go for arbitration, because if it does, the core issue of a caste discrimination will not be recognized as a court ruling, and hence the advantage of caste being a part of discriminatory criteria framework will not be available for the future cases. So far, there are two rulings in the case talking about the justice system here. The Cisco requested arbitration owing to a clause in the recruitment contract, which the court has not allowed. Court is proceeding, not allowing the arbitration, proceeding to go for the hearings. The second ruling is on disclosing the identity of the victim. Now, keeping the identity secret is allowed only for sexual harassment cases in the US, as we understand. While of course the DFEH has argued that the stigma of caste will impact the future job prospects of the victim and associated stigma on the family and the children, because we know that the scheduled caste, the erstwhile untouchables. Their shadows itself pollutes people, as the Hindu Shastras try to teach. The other children, the neighbors who come to know their caste, they will shun them, they will ostracize them, they will not play with them, and the prospects of getting the future job will be very dim for the victim. So the court has strictly gone by the statute, and they said the victim's identity should be revealed. Now, this is where the jurisprudence really comes in the sense, this is a pioneering case. The caste is being heard, not exactly for the first time. There have been a case or two earlier as well, but this is a pioneering case. And every time a fresh, such a pioneering case kind of comes up, the court will have to really think each of these aspects afresh. We'll have to kind of go beyond the boundaries that the US Constitution itself sets, because the thing which is the caste is not recognized in the US jurisprudence. And if they have to recognize, they have to really understand what the caste means. Just because only sexual cases are allowed where the victim's identity is not disclosed, caste victims are allowed to be disclosed. Court will have to think some of these matters a little hard and fast. Of course, the DFEH has appealed that decision of the court to the appellate court. We hope that the court understands the argument, understand how the caste stigmatize the family and the group of people and protects the identity of the victim.
Can I go? So,
Yeah.
Milind or Jaspreet, would you like to comment or can I go?
I think a very important point that comes out of what Anil just said is the identity, the risk with identity as a erstwhile untouchable or Dalit or somebody who has a reservation, and the repercussions of that identity. And that probably would be very difficult to for someone to understand or to comprehend in its full impact if they haven't been part of that lived life or that experience or even that society on either side of the fence. So it would be, I can assume, imagine a bit of a challenge to empathize or to, explain those potential not downside, but potential risks of disclosing the identity, because it's just so specific and endemic to the caste issue, which really is new in this country, at least in the judicial sense.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd like to add a little bit on the Cisco case and about the activism by the Dalit activist. So as far as the case is concerned, that we firmly believe that all oppressions are inextricably coupled. So you cannot liberate any oppressed group without actually liberating all. Meanwhile, that within the given status quo, there are some remedies has to be extended to the socially oppressed. And as far as the caste is concerned, it is not only differentiate, but also the differentiation come with the stigmatization. That is what has to be really the American corporate has to be educated, but such education is not possible because the early migrants to the United States is predominantly from the privileged or so-called upper caste, because they monopolized education for centuries. And now the same section which came to the United States through the birth-based privileges, they were occupying hiring and firing positions in the tech industry. Given this situation, even somebody who is facing the caste discrimination, that they cannot go and make a complaint, because on the one hand, non-South Asians does not know what is caste. I will come to know that at what level their ignorance is. And second, the person who is facing such a discrimination cannot open up with his superiors, because mostly they are from the privileged caste, so they may ignore or they may face retaliation. So as far as the Cisco case is concerned, it is historic. It is historic not only with respect to the United States, but it is historic globally, because even there is no such case in India also. And secondly, when the Cisco case is filed on the caste-based discrimination, the Justice Department has made an intervention in other cases. I would like to mention two cases. In 2020 December, the Justice Department itself sued Facebook for alleged discrimination in recruitment against non-Asians. So Facebook prefers Asians in their recruitment and non-Asians are discriminated. That is in 2020 December. Meanwhile, there is another Justice Department complaint which is filed in the year of September 2016 against a company called Plantair, which is data analytic company, which is very very niche technology they are working, and many people, those who are working in the tech industry, during their lifetime at least they want to get into that company and working once. And there the discrimination, the same Justice Department filed a complaint against them that they are discriminating Asians in that company. So such discriminations are going. And the caste discrimination, when it is filed in the Cisco case, it is very clear the Cisco policies are covering or protecting the people, those who are suffering from racial discrimination, which is based on the birth or ancestry base or hierarchy and all this. Even with all these policies in place, when John Doe made a complaint, the Cisco made a position that caste discrimination is not unlawful. which is originally when it comes to the HR in 2016, because John's joined in 2015 and the complaint is made in 2016. And they did not change the position even when the case is filed by the Department of Fair Employment and Housing in July 2020, and which moved to the state court in October 2020. After the October 2020, the Cisco legal executive, his name is Mr. Mark Chandler, wrote a blog in official Cisco site. He explains about the Cisco's position, and please go through and please go and read it. That is a very important block in this case. He concludes that Cisco will support any legal protection against caste in law. It will support it when such a legal protection comes in. But we cannot take an action. Currently, it is not unlawful. Not only that, I would like to a little bit expand on what Anil told with respect to Mr. Chandler's position. From the start of the block, he mentioned about Ms. Wilkerson caste book, the caste is the origins of disabilities, and he mentioned that book educated him. And that he wrote in November 2020. In the caste book, Wilkerson clearly writes that how the element of stigma it is attached to caste. It is not merely that you are a X caste, you are a Y caste. Because in India, I firmly believe that caste mobilization is not at all possible, and they are made through work because through the neoliberal policies. Because in India has 6,700 caste closely, which is accounted number. I do not know how many. So if the Cisco understood the Miss Isabel Wilkerson book clearly, the part of stigma, the Cisco would not go on to file the motion in the court in February 2021 to reveal the identity of John Doe. And what the people, those who are the offenders, the alleged offenders, both Sundar and Ramana says, since their caste identity is revealed, the John's caste identity also revealed. It's okay, they are individuals. They do not understand. But Cisco themselves filed the same reason. And Sundar claims that he is not a Hindu and he is not practicing Brahmanism. He is not going to temple. So that he cannot be considered as a Brahmin. Whereas John files in motion says that he is a temple going Hindu. And if caste is revealed, that he will face social boycott from his temple going people. So I would like to end with one analogy of what Cisco is not able to understand with respect to the hierarchical or ancestral or the birthplace discrimination is. There was a case come in the Indian court, maybe 100 years before or 60, 70 years before. The case is a victim is punched on his face by an offender allegedly, and the defense lawyer appearing for the victim says, my client allegedly punched on the nose of a victim. Then the government counsel says, my lord, my party is not punched on the face but on the nose. Then the defense counsel responded that the nose is a part of a face. I need not to take a class on physiology to my fellow arguer. So I will not go to the detail of this case. Why I mentioned this case is, it is definitely whether you punch on the face or the nose, the discrimination is discrimination, which is part of the hierarchy and the birthplace. And I mentioned this example because this example, Ambedkar is one of the party which appeared in the case.
So the amicus brief that Ambedkar International Center filed and endorsed by AKSC, PSG, and other Hindus for Human Rights, other organizations, we had a lot of debate as to how to kind of what all we need to include. Lawyers had prepared a draft, and we had a lot of professors from UK, Australia, US, including Professor Kevin Brown from US, Indiana University, Professor Annapurna Wagure from UK, Professor Hari Bapuji from Australia. And we kind of debated, including Karthikeyan and people on the panel, we were debating as to what all needs to go in. We felt the draft, that amicus brief that we filed, is not making very strong points against the Hinduism. And our lawyers were kind of trying to tell us, no, don't bring in the entire thing. Just stick to the point that the discrimination happened. While we were arguing that the way the caste is recognized by Hinduism, that the Brahmin is born from the mouth, and then the whole 9 yards. The way Manusmriti writes about how when a Brahmin commits a rape or rapes a scheduled caste woman, he should be almost pardoned, nothing should be done. Whereas a scheduled caste person rapes, or willingly for that matter, it need not be a rape, sleeps with the Brahmin woman, he should be murdered. If he happens to hear Sanskrit, like earlier I told about when we were talking about merit, that scheduled castes are not even supposed to hear Sanskrit, even by mistake. Molten lead should be poured into his ears. If he speaks Sanskrit verses, his tongue should be chopped. So this is the Manusmriti, which is nothing but a constitution of a Hinduism. While one of the argument is that this is a South Asian phenomenon, not a India specific, not a Hindu religion specific, the way Hinduism endorses the whole thing, we wanted it to be mentioned. However, of course, our lawyers prevailed, saying that let's not make it Hindu versus the rest argument. Just stick to, don't make it a bombastic argument. It was the word kind of used. Just stick to the fact that the discrimination happened. We do not want to make the judge understand the entire the Hindu mythology and all of that. However, we filed the amicus brief only after HAF, the Hindu American Foundation, wanted to become a party, wanted to kind of say that the casteism has nothing to do with the Hinduism. And I thought we as a Ambedkar International Center and other sister organizations, we felt that we should stand up in the court. We want to be that lightning rod, if I may say so. If there are any other cases of such caste victimization, we want to hear. There were some parties, and Professor Kevin Brown was asking us, Anil, if there is a case I bring to your notice, what do you want to do tomorrow? We said we will collect the funds from like-minded organizations, and we'll fight these caste discrimination cases if brought to our notice. And Professor Kevin Brown was very happy with that answer, and he endorsed. And a lot of academicians later on also endorsed that amicus brief. So overall, it has been a great experience, great learning experience. Because all the time you hear about HAF and some of those organizations, and nobody is kind of collectively standing up. So we're glad that AKSC, ourselves, BSG, kind of stood up, went to the court. So it has been a very good experience. When we want to kind of make certain things, some of these things, when we started this journey, we felt it's very difficult. But as they say that the nature conspires to make you a success, it happened. The academicians helped us. The lawyers were very nice to work with. Our sister organizations were willing to help financially and otherwise. It has been a very beautiful experience. Just wanted to put it on record.
Any final comments on that? We have a few audience questions that we are hoping to get to as well. Okay.
I think we should get to the questions, yeah.
Okay, sounds good. All right. So the first question is, can you speak about the intersection of sexism in this conversation about caste discrimination, particularly because gender discrimination is well known in the tech industry?
Yeah, so maybe I will try and take it, and others, Milind and Karthikeyan and Jasprit can probably add. The caste and the women, there is no difference in India. When scheduled castes were not allowed the education, women were also not allowed the education. Women are as bad, or all their indicators for the women back in India are same as the caste. Today, even women are just barely 15% in IITs. And of course, a lot of corporate sectors are now making an attempt to hire more of them, and of course there is a caste angle that overlaps on the status of women, so to say. That there are indeed those challenges, but the status of women and the caste, there is a huge overlap. They were also denied, including Brahmin women for that matter. They were not treated equal at all. So they did suffer. Just one additional point that some of the newer, when we are talking about technology and the artificial intelligence, which is now picking up the resumes, you will find all the biases that are there in the current systems. All those biases are just getting exactly replicated. We are not coming up with better systems. So if the women's resume profile gets picked up half the time, everything being equal, it is even so in the AI, because the way AI algorithms are written, they are actually looking at the underlying data. And if there are biases in the underlying data, those biases are even reflected here as well. Similarly, those biases are against Muslims as well. Muslims resumes do not get picked up. The scheduled caste resumes do not get picked up. There have been umpteen experiments wherein exact same profile with similar qualifications, same experience, just change the name and your probability goes down. It happens with women, it happens with scheduled caste, it happens with Muslims.
I'll take that point further, Anil. Thank you. So yes, like Anil said, the discrimination against women and their denial of rights was on the same level as the erstwhile untouchable, and it all originated from the same Manusmriti that was referred to earlier. And there was a movement even before Dr. Ambedkar back in India by Justice Ranade and Telang and quite a few, Rajaram Mohan Roy, who addressed particularly the issues of women and higher caste women, because the lower caste, particularly the scheduled caste, had a much bigger set of problems to be focusing only on the women part. And now in today's society, what we see is there is definitely a gender bias that needs to be improved, that needs to be worked on. But when it comes to the scheduled caste women, the untouchable women, their bodies are being used as a tool to rein in and to arrest the upward mobility or to have any kind of reprisals for any assertion that the Dalits are doing. So there is this very big difference between the gender discrimination against upper caste women and against Dalit women. And that atrocity plays out in remote India for the most part, not so much in the urban areas, because there is more scrutiny and there is more accountability there. But in the remote part of India, the women, the gender politics plays out in a very different way, in a very brutal way for the scheduled caste and lower caste people in comparison to how it plays out for the upper caste women. But yes, the upper caste women also are victims of gender discrimination, no doubt, but they are not at the exactly same level of suffering as the scheduled caste women. Thank you.
At this point, I also want to add to just the information of folks who haven't read Dr. Ambedkar as much, is that if you go to his Annihilation of Caste essay, you would be really, there are amazing insights there, but I think one of the insights for me personally was that actually, if you look deep down, the caste is based on control of women's sexuality. So how does caste perpetuate? It perpetuates through endogamy. And how do you maintain that endogamy and purity of your lineage, of your caste? You do that through controlling whom the women can marry or not marry. So, in my personal understanding, I always believe that if you are talking about the annihilation of caste, you're also talking about for women's rights. And that's what Babasaheb stands for. Like his the biggest part of where he gave up his political representation rights seat in the parliament was to kind of like protest because Hindu Code Bill was not passed, which was giving rights to women. Of course, at that point, the women from privileged communities did not understand that. They were kind of like fighting back against that. So it's not to say that women from privileged communities do not perpetuate caste. They do in so many different ways. But the time when we understand that actually caste is very closely linked to women's slavery, women's control of sexuality, that's when we will be able to, move away from this whole narrative that folks who are born in the marginalized communities need to work for caste. No, folks who are born in any caste need to work for annihilation of caste.
Yeah, I agree with all the three panelists, and don't want to repeat what they told, but I'd like to add my opinion that I'd like to bring another intersection to this important question of cost and gender. So cost and gender question has, in the tech industry especially, is very inextricably coupled with the question, the class question. And one manifestation of that, when the Google workers formed their union, which is actually called as Alphabet Workers Union, or informally known as the Google Union. The effort itself is started with the women's walkout, which happened in a couple of years before, and eventually it culminated in the formation of the union. And now that tech workers, that Alphabet Workers Union are not like a 20th century and 19th century trade union, which is only confined to the economical issue of the workers. They are taking up the social issues also. And even they are very much in support of John Doe in the Cisco caste discrimination case. And also when we talk about the caste or the gender discrimination, usually people see it is from the liberal angle. There was a opinion or a vote or poll taken from the 600 entrepreneurs from the Silicon Valley, and their position is very liberal with respect to many things. They are supporting the single payer healthcare. They are supporting the racial discrimination should not be there, and all the left of the Democratic Party position. But the same entrepreneur says that there should not be union. And the same entrepreneur says there should not be a government regulation in tech industry. And we see what is happening without regulation, the way that Facebook and Amazon are working. So besides the caste and gender, that until we bring the class question and working with the class conscious, caste conscious, race conscious workers, only then it can be resolved. But the tendency is mainly, I would like to conclude, mainly such a tendency is there's a predominant, the aristocracy of the tech laborers. And the tendency is there, but that they are not completely 100%. They may be 20-25%, which is very well dealt with Eric Hobsbawm's books, The Revolutionaries, which he touched from Lenin's Imperialism and the Split, which Lenin draws from Engels' British workers. But now the same workers, they have to understand this tendency of aristocracy is because they are being bribed by soaps, by the capitalist industries, and until they overcome and educate the fellow neutral workers against this tendency of aristocracy and bringing all this caste, gender, and the race and the race and the class question together, and that is the point that both the women and the oppressed class people can be liberated.
Thank you. So we are at the end of the panel. So firstly, I'd like to thank all the speakers for being here today. I think that was a really